King Bekari is back, and this time he's taking things way too far. His love and admiration for the world nobles has inspired him to peek into their playbook and borrow some of their more horrific ideas for improving countries. Have a bunch of unruly citizens who won't kowtow to you and your every command? Why not just burn them all alive? Let the fire snuff out the trash of the country and let a more beautiful kingdom be reborn in their ashes. That is literally how we open up this chapter, with this monster having the audacity to commit what could only be described as a war crime on his own citizens. And while there will never be characters more detestable than the celestial dragons in One Piece, in the short amount of time that we've known Bekari, he has quickly risen up the ranks to almost their level. He's like this annoying cough that just won't go away no matter what you do. Every time we think we're done with him, he just keeps coming back with an even more ridiculous plan. Even going so far as using his connections in the world government to help frame Kuma for his own actions after being once again outed from the kingdom and Kuma being named king in his place. Although it's worth noting that while Kuma held the title of king, like we all expected, he really had someone else rule the country for him the entire time. Because Kuma never wanted to be king. He didn't want the title, he didn't want the wealth, he didn't even want the power that came with the position. He just wanted to continue helping others. Which is more than likely the reason why he took the title in the first place, because it's what the people of Sorbet Kingdom wanted. And with someone as powerful as Kuma as a king, he would become a natural deterrent for those who would want to come and cause his kingdom harm. Despite all of his hardships and everything he's lost in life, Kuma still wanted to help others more than anything, because at his core, Kuma was a genuinely good person. So good that even after everything Bekari's done, he still wouldn't kill him. But that doesn't mean Kuma was above dishing out punishment when necessary, as we see when he confronts Bekari in one of the most rage-filled depictions of our lovable bear man that we ever seen. He destroys the entire castle, sending Bekari flying from the kingdom. And honestly, I have to hand it to Oda. In just these last few chapters, he's shown us so many different sides and expressions of Kuma that we never thought we'd see based on his initial introduction, where he was just blank and robotic. But in this flashback, we've seen him laugh, we've seen him cry, we've seen him full of rage. And once we get back to the present day and he inevitably ends up on Egghead, it's going to break our hearts once again to see him as the emotionless cyborg he's become. And we can only hope that in his final moments, because this arc will more than likely be his last, we can get a glimpse of the old Kuma when he's finally reunited with Bonnie. And speaking of Bonnie, the scene where we reveal that she's accidentally eaten the Toshi Toshi no Mi just might be my favorite of the entire chapter. And just the randomness of the entire scene had me dying. Like, I genuinely thought I had somehow missed a panel or word box saying that we had somehow jumped forward in time a few years. Then everyone and her own reactions to the reveal was just simply priceless. Also, considering that Oda had forgotten until recently to even name Bonnie's devil fruit, it makes sense that this is how he'd reveal her getting it, completely off panel and without her even realizing. Though I do wish we could have at least figured out how the fruit ended up in the church in the first place. Like, did someone donate it to them with other supplies of food? Did she venture outside without her father knowing and find the fruit somewhere? It's definitely not important, but still, it would be nice to see on panel. Oh, and also the scene where Queen Connie gets mistaken for Bonnie is just simply hilarious. Now, due to Bekari's slander campaign against Kuma and him once again for some reason trying to make his return to the throne of Sorbet Kingdom, Kuma is forced to confront him and the Navy soldiers aiding him out at sea. But doing so means that he will be officially labeled as a criminal and be forced to leave the kingdom and, more importantly, Bonnie behind. A decision which Kuma makes surprisingly easily. I mean, I don't know, with how protective of Bonnie Kuma's been since the day he found her, I figured being forced to separate from her would be a much harder choice for him to make. Like, we all going into this chapter assumed that the deal he makes with the world government to cure Bonnie would be the only thing that could force him to leave her side for even a day, let alone permanently. But here he is, just casually deciding to go off and become a pirate. Now, granted, he is a pirate in name only, and using it as an excuse to travel the world to try to find a cure for Bonnie. But still, I expected much more of an eternal struggle over this decision than we ended up getting. Though, in Kuma's defense, he does have the perfect devil fruit for getting in and out of the kingdom whenever he wants to, so I guess whenever he decides that he misses Bonnie, he can just sneak back into the kingdom and then get out of there before anyone even knows he's there. Oh, and speaking of Kuma's quote-unquote pirating days, this quick montage of him going from island to island is something I really hope they expand on in the anime. I don't need an entire episode devoted to it, but just a few minutes on each island would really help sell the struggles Kuma went through to try to find a cure. Now, on to something more serious, and I've been meaning to talk about this ever since the last chapter came out, and that's the whole situation around Dragon and his actions, or I guess lack of actions in the previous chapter. Because I've seen a lot of discourse in the fandom about the subject, whether Dragon as the leader of the revolutionaries is at fault for not attempting to save Jenny, or if he made the right choice due to his position. And while the subject as a whole is a very heavy topic, there is one aspect of the conversation we can address from this chapter, and that's whether Kuma feels any anger or resentment towards Dragon for the whole entire situation. And we can see in this chapter that the answer is clearly no. Kuma holds absolutely no ill will towards Dragon, nor does he seem to blame him for what happened to Jinny at all. In fact, Kuma still seems to respect Dragon a great deal, even going to him for advice on how to handle the entire situation with trying to find Bonnie's cure. Now, that being said, we do see that Dragon does try to honor both Kuma and Jinny by refusing to give over her position of the captain of the Eastern Army to anyone unless they were personally approved for it by Kuma, which he gladly gives to Belle Betty in this chapter, who, by the way, is looking really good with her much longer hair in this flashback. Not that there's anything wrong with her current day short hair look, I've just always personally preferred women with longer hair. Now, before I move on to the next part, I do want to say, even though Kuma doesn't blame Dragon for what happened, it is perfectly fair for those of you in the fandom who do hold responsible for it. I'm just saying that if Kuma, the person who actually is the most connected and the most drastically affected by the situation, doesn't hold any resentment towards Dragon, then I think it's time for us to kind of just move on from the entire situation and continue on with the story. Anyway, this scene leads directly into the moment that we've all been both anticipating and dreading throughout the entirety of this flashback: Kuma meeting Vegapunk. Anticipating because we'll finally get to know all the details of the deal Kuma made with this mad scientist, but also dreading because we know what it all inevitably leads to. Though I think it's safe to say that this meeting went a lot better than any of us imagined it would, with Vegapunk offering to completely cure Bonnie's illness in exchange for Kuma letting him use his DNA to create the pacifistas. We even get this cute moment where Kuma accidentally ends up naming his future robotic clones by mentioning that he doesn't like fighting and prefers to be a pacifist. But the important thing to note from the meeting between these two is that there is absolutely no mentioning of experimenting on Kuma directly, or turning his body into a cybernetic one. Hell, there's not even a request from Vegapunk for Kuma to work alongside the world government. No, the only thing that Vegapunk wanted was to borrow a bit of Kuma's Buccaneer DNA for his future soldiers, which he actually calls heroes in this chapter. Which, by the way, once Vegapunk actually ends up realizing that Kuma's a Buccaneer, he hints at knowing more about the race and their history than anyone else has, which is something we definitely need to find out from him before the end of the Egghead arc. Preferably before this flashback ends, because his chances of surviving in the present day are really not looking good. Now, one more thing before I get into the big reveal at the end of the chapter, Vegapunk tells Kuma that in order to cure Bonnie, he will have to create and transplant new stem cells into her. Which I looked up, and that is an actual real-life medical procedure usually used to treat certain types of cancer, and while it is possible to take stem cells from the patient themselves and use them in the transplant, it is more common for the cells to come from a donor. And the reason why I bring this up is because earlier in the arc, we saw a shot of Bonnie using her power to age herself up into an alternate future version of herself that had a similar build to Kuma. So, what if Vegapunk used Kuma's cells to help cure Bonnie, turning her into a Buccaneer hybrid? That would explain why she was able to take on that appearance, and it would fit perfectly with the beginning of the chapter, where the first time we see her, she's training to make herself stronger so that she can travel with her dad around the world. And you know, that's just a theory, a little food for thought, nothing concrete saying that's true, but I'm more likely guessing that the next chapter we're going to see him doing exactly what I just said, transplanting some of Kuma's cells into Bonnie. Oh, and by the way, it was cute seeing young Bonnie playing around with Sentomaru, though I'm not sure letting a kid play around and sit on your axe was the best idea, but hey, she didn't end up dying, so I guess it worked out fine. Now, getting to the big moment at the end of the chapter, we cut over to Saturn, who has really become the overall main antagonist of this entire arc, talking to someone on a Dendemushi. I can't exactly make out who the person is because the Dendemushi is silhouetted everywhere besides its lips for some reason, but we can assume it's someone at the lab who's eavesdropping on Vegapunk and Kuma because the person says I'll be there as requested. But it's clear, just like in the present day, Saturn plans on traveling to Egghead and taking advantage of the deal between Vegapunk and Kuma to make him their slave again. Obviously using Bonnie as a hostage to get Kuma to agree to becoming a warlord and to becoming a full-on cyborg in exchange for Bonnie's safety. Which, on the one hand, is very hard to believe that Saturn and the rest of the Gorosei kept up their word this entire time, but it makes total sense why he's okay with killing her in the present day, because as far as he's concerned, Kuma's full-on cyborg and no longer really useful to them anymore, so there's no reason for him to actually keep up his word and actually keep Bonnie alive. So now that she's right in front of him, he's going to take this advantage to basically kill her off and officially ending Kuma's family line. Now, what happens in the next chapter really isn't up for question. We already know exactly how the deal between Saturn and Kuma is most likely going to end up going down, but what we don't know is who is the mysterious person that's reporting to Saturn about Vegapunk. We know it can't be Sentomaru because obviously he's loyal to Vegapunk above everyone else, and considering he just recently started his lab on Egghead and has yet to create punk records, I doubt any of the satellites have been created yet. Now, it could be Kizaru, but the person who's speaking through the Dendemushi doesn't have Kizaru's normal speech pattern, so it's highly unlikely, but still a possibility due to everything we've seen so far from him. Anyway, I can imagine that once we reveal who the mysterious traitor is, they will become one of the most hated characters in the entirety of the One Piece fandom, because they will be the ones solely responsible for Kuma's inevitable downfall.